social representations of gender, the development of national identities, history teaching, and collective memory. He's currently an assistant professor at the Department of Psychology of the University of Cyprus. He's a founding member of the Association for Historical Dialogue and Research and the research director of the association. So, Hans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. What I want to do today is to talk about the notion of cooperation as a form of social relation that has been proposed in both social and developmental psychology as a crucial element in the promotion of cognitive and moral development, as well as a key condition of societal change in the case of post-conflict societies in the form of reduction of prejudice and promotion of trust and reconciliation. In that way, I hope that I will make clear to you what the Home for Cooperation means to me, that we are celebrating today. I will discuss the application of social relations of cooperation in 3 domains. First, cognitive and moral development. Second, intergroup contact and the reduction of prejudice. And third, history teaching. I might not have the time to expand on the last one, but I will certainly say a few things. As Professor Anneli Permon discussed earlier, a key insight of the Piagetian social developmental psychology, as proposed in the moral judgment of the child and sociological studies, is the introduction of a fundamental distinction between 2 types of social relationships: relations of constraint and relations of cooperation. Where there is constraint, because one participant holds more power, status, authority, prestige than the other, the relationship is asymmetrical. And importantly, the knowledge which can be acquired by the dominated participant takes on a fixed and inflexible form. Piaget refers to this process as one of social transmission, and he refers to the way in which the elders of a tribe in traditional societies initiate younger members into the patterns of beliefs and practices of the group, transferring the collective representations of one generation to the next. Similarly, where adults exercise a dominating influence over the growing child, it is through social transmission that children acquire what Piaget calls just a thin layer of beliefs, contrary to knowledge. By contrast, in cooperative relations, power, status, authority, prestige is more evenly distributed between participants so that a more symmetrical relationship emerges. Under these conditions, authentic forms of intellectual exchange become possible, since each partner has the freedom to project their own thoughts, consider the positions of others, and defend their own point of view. In such circumstances, where children's thinking is not limited by a dominant influence, the conditions exist for the emergence of constructive solutions to problems, or what Piaget refers to as the reconstruction of knowledge, rather than just social transmission of beliefs. Here, the knowledge which emerges is open, flexible, and regulated by the logic of argument, rather than being determined by an external authority. In short, cooperative relations provide the arena for the emergence of cognitive operations, which for Piaget requires the absence of any constraining influence and is most often illustrated by relations that form between peers. Relations of cooperation also promote moral development. For Piaget, moral and cognitive development, in fact, are 2 sides of the same coin. One of his famous dictums is that morality is the logic of action, just as logic is the morality of thought. Thus, for Piaget, 2 stages of moral judgment correspond to the 2 forms of social relations, constraint and cooperation. Constraint relates to a heteronymous form of morality related with younger children, and cooperation to a more advanced form of autonomous morality related with older children. Constraint is the first relationship children experience with their parents, which tends to involve unilateral respect and one-sided authority. Adults impose rules on children, and because of the lack of equality, adults may not feel obligated to justify their rules or listen to children's point of view. Children follow these moral rules due to the respect they feel for adults or older children, but cannot reach an understanding of the purpose of the rules, and therefore they see rules as external and unchangeable. They see the rules as sacred and untouchable, something passed down from previous generations and ultimately from God. Still, Piaget observed that the younger heteronymous children would easily break these rules, these sacred rules, in practice while playing, since they did not really understand them and not felt committed to them. In contrast, in cooperative relations, individuals must understand each other's perspective, and this requires listening to others and explaining one's own position. Cooperation alone, says Piaget, can shake the child out of its initial state of unconscious egocentrism. Within such cooperative relationships, children develop an understanding of rules as based on mutual agreement. Therefore, rules can be changed as long as everyone concerned agrees. Here it is observed that children, the older children in the stage of autonomous morality, were more consistent in following the rules of the games, since they understood the rules as they were part of their creation and felt committed to them. As Anneli already mentioned, these views of Piaget were directly related to his work at the Jean-Jacques Rousseau Institute in Geneva, and more generally the reform efforts of a new education, as it was called back then. In a speech that Piaget gave in the Congress of the New Education Fellowship, held on Nice, 1st of August 1932, he asked how the new education could contribute to social progress. For Piaget, the child creates a social life with his peers, and I quote here, "We notice that in measure to the degree that he mixes with his peers, he reaches, intellectually speaking, both a critical spirit and a sense of reflection. On the moral level, this social world fosters a sense of nuances, of intentions beyond blind obedience." For Piaget, the development of reasoning was a way to assert one's autonomy and develop a personality that overcomes egocentrism and self-interested thinking. This was another way of cultivating critical thinking, reflection as a way of thinking that contributes to humanism, social solidarity and democratic citizenship, internationalism and world peace. Yet Piaget wondered, why is this tendency towards cooperation that we observe in children more likely to be crushed than used and developed by education? This clarity of the distinction between the two forms of social relationships in Piaget is both a strength and a weakness. It is a strength because it paints a clear picture of the values to aim for through education: mutual respect, reciprocity, unconstrained dialogue, for both the cognitive and moral development of the child on the one hand, and on the other hand for social progress. But it is also a weakness to the extent that these two forms are pure ideal types, referring to relationships between epistemic, even universal subjects, and not social psychological subjects, where belongingness to a different group and social identities have a formative role in children's social interaction. I would argue that rarely would people feel they are of equal status, satisfying the condition for cooperation. Asymmetries are innumerable and hail from the fact that we all belong to innumerable groups and categories. A person can be male or female, belonging to a majority or a minority, considered as poor or good student, being popular or not, being of high or low social class, etc. Thus, in a social interaction, it is the combination of different asymmetries of the partners that will form the conditions for the exchange or not of views, and we have only just started scratching the surface of these dynamics in contemporary research in social interaction and cognitive development. Scott Anneli talked about creating these thinking spaces. Piaget actually never studied the influence of social interaction in the promotion of cognitive and moral development. This was done by a research program initiated in Geneva in the early 70s by the pioneering work of Willem Doise, Anne Clermont, and Gabriel Duny. I think that the essence of this work was the revealing of the importance of what they called socio-cognitive conflict, which is the conflict of viewpoints brought in social interaction as the key mechanism for cognitive development. I interpret this mechanism as a manifestation of relations of cooperation. I think this is the essence of a relation of cooperation. It's the relationship that allows this conflict of perspectives. Following this line of research, more recently, late Gerard Duvin and Patrick Lehman in Cambridge added another layer of complexity to the equation, which was based on the recognition that gender as a form of social identity could be acting as a source of status asymmetry in social interaction around the moral judgment task, and that in fact it could conflict or align with the knowledge asymmetry of the interacting partners, thus changing the form and content of the interaction depending on the gender composition of the interacting dyad. When we continued this line of research with Gerard Duvin, we discovered that under conditions of conflicting asymmetries of different nature, for example, gender and knowledge, the possibility for socio-cognitive conflict and cognitive progress of the less developmentally advanced children was significantly increased compared to conditions of aligned asymmetry. For example, as some of you might have noticed from their everyday experiences, when a female expert attempts to communicate her knowledge to a male novice, the result is often resistance from the male to be positioned as novice and an attempt by the male to take the upper hand somehow during social interaction. It was indeed impressive to replicate this dynamic with 6 to 7 year olds here in Cyprus with two different Piagetian cognitive tasks and observe the long-lasting influence of these dynamics in the promotion of the cognitive development of these boys that have the lack of interacting with the female expert. But also on the contrary, observing in a disappointing way the difficulty that girls faced in overcoming inactivity and passiveness under the opposite situation. That is, where the girls were the novices and males were the experts. In fact, it came as no surprise to us that rarely girls made progress under this specific condition. Let me now return back in time to retrace the notion of cooperation in the context of the study of intergroup relations and reduction of prejudice as a form of societal change that was never really developed by Piaget himself, with the exception of a single study with Weil in 1951 on the idea of homeland in children. The notion of cooperation is found again in social psychology as a condition of societal change in the writings of Gorton Allport in 1954. This is when in his book, The Nature of Prejudice, he hypothesizes that contact between members of different groups with a past of conflict, mistrust, and prejudice could lead to the reduction of prejudice provided four conditions are met. In his words, prejudice, unless deeply rooted in the character structure of the individual, may be reduced by equal status contact between majority and minority groups in the pursuit of common goals. The effect is greatly enhanced if this contact is sanctioned by institutional supports, i.e. by law, custom, or local atmosphere, and provided it is of a sort that leads to the perception of common interests and common humanity between members of the two groups. Putting aside the preoccupation of Allport with personality, the similarity of Piagetian relations of cooperation with Allport's conditions of equal status, common goal, and intimate contact is clear. It would seem that there is the implicit assumption in Allport that contact under cooperative conditions allows for decentration in Piagetian terms from the ethnocentric biases and rectification of the negative representation of the other that would generalize to the whole outlook, creating positive feelings. Allport's stressing of the importance of institutional support and social representations of supporting contact, in my view, is an advancement from Piagetian theory to the extent that there is recognition of a more modern and less imposing view of Durkheimian collective representation. What Moscovici would probably call social representations based on knowledge, that are amenable to the proof of success or failure. In that way, Allport does not treat social representations as an undifferentiated evil that crushes autonomy and constrains the free exchange of views, but recognizes that there is a form of social representations that can actually support the process of cooperation as an open and unconstrained dialogue. It is worth noting that Allport was only a year younger than Piaget. He had traveled in Berlin in 1922 and Cambridge in 1923, and also visited Freud, and he must have met Piaget at least 2 times. First, when Piaget was awarded his first honorary doctorate at Harvard in 1936, and then in 1960 when Piaget was invited to Harvard to give a talk by Jerome Bruner. Bruner recalls that in the 40s at Harvard, we all knew about Piaget. I cannot remember a time that we didn't. The extent to which Allport appreciated Piaget's work is questionable though, since as the chairman of the Department of Psychology at Harvard in 1935, he did not nominate Piaget for the honorary doctorate. Rather, the nomination came from members of the Central Executive Committee for the honorary degrees that comprised a multidisciplinary group closely affiliated with the work of Elton Mayo and the human relations movement in the Harvard Business School, and their work on the Hawthorne experiment. Elton Mayo followed Piaget's work closely, and he used to advise his students and collaborators to understand Piaget's theory and clinical interview and apply it to the study of organizational issues. According to Sue, a historian of psychology, Elton Mayo found in Piaget's work a key understanding of the formation of social cooperation. Cooperative attitudes and activities are not innate in us, but need to be nourished by supportive social life, he wrote. Still, there was another common dimension in the lives of Allport and Piaget that had to do with the humanitarian and internationalist aspect of educational policy. Piaget was the director, as Amélie said earlier, of the International Bureau of Education in Geneva. After 1945, when UNESCO was created, Allport was a member of the International Division of Social Sciences of UNESCO. Soon after 1945, the 2 intergovernmental organizations signed an agreement and collaborated for many years with the aim of promoting global peace through education until finally the International Bureau was incorporated into UNESCO. Allport certainly read at least some of Piaget's work because in his nature of prejudice, he cites approvingly the work of Piaget and Weil in the development of the idea of homeland, and he himself had an active interest in the ontogenesis of prejudice in children. In a similar way as we did for the social developmental work, this work has recently progressed, and we have actually been studying the way that contact and the conditions under which contact between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots leads to the reduction of prejudice and the promotion of trust. And here again, we recently understood that the importance of this conflict of asymmetries seems to be very important for the reduction of prejudice. And I'm basing this on the following finding. We found that in our recent research in formerly mixed villages, where we had more than 2,000 people who were participating, representing a sample of mixed villages in both communities, we found that in villages where the village dynamics, let's say, were favoring the power of Turkish Cypriots, who were, let's say, in the major societal context, were actually in the minority. This conflict of the village dynamics with the societal dynamics, these 2 asymmetries, actually seem to produce a very productive kind of relationships between the 2 communities. And I'm basing this, for example, we found that Greek Cypriots who used to live in this kind of villages, where the Turkish Cypriots had more population, more financial status, more land, more livestock, machinery, etc., that the more power Turkish Cypriots had in the village, the more likely it was that Greek Cypriots would have more contact and friendships with Turkish Cypriots in the past and now, less direct experience of conflict, so there was less conflict in their village, less likely to blame Turkey, British, NATO, or the foreigners for the Cyprus issue, except ourselves, less likely to feel threatened, and less prejudice and more trust. Now, the picture was similar for Turkish Cypriots. The more power Turkish Cypriots had in the village, the more likely it was that Turkish Cypriots would have more contact with Greek Cypriots in the past and now, less likely to blame the foreigners, less likely to feel threatened, less prejudice, more identification with Cypriot identity, and less identification with their communal identity. So on the whole, I think from both strands of research, I think we come to a similar conclusion, that the productive tension of conflict between asymmetries can indeed lead to transformation. And since I'm out of time, this was essentially an application of relations of cooperation in the field of history teaching. There is a similar distinction, if you like, by Lowenthal. It is a well-known distinction among historians about learning or presenting the past as heritage, and on the other hand, presenting the past as history. Because heritage deliberately omits aspects of the past, it thrives on ignorance and error, its nurturing virtue is bias, its essential purpose is prejudice, pride. In a sense, it tries to promote one perspective that appears to be the only right one, whereas history tries to be more objective, even if objectivity can never be completely achieved. It's open to dialogue, it's an open system. It has to do with questioning the evidence, the sources. It's about continuous dialogue and research around the sources. So you can see, I think, the basic distinction, the Piagetian distinction, again played in history teaching. And in a sense, this is the three pillars, if you like, of cooperation that I wanted to talk about today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hayes. And questions already? Yes?
Can I ask a clarification question?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Slide before this one. About Turkish. So here, the more power Turkish Cypriots have in the village, the more likely it has. So this was only done by the Turkish Cypriots.
I was trying.
Can you repeat the question, please, for the children?
I'm trying to ask a clarification question because I'm a little bit confused. Is this only when Turkish Cypriots had more power in a village? Did you have a study where Greek Cypriots had more power in the village?
This is actually based on correlations. So correlations at the village level, if you like, with what happens at the individual level. So in a sense, in villages where the Turkish Cypriots tended to be more in terms of power and numbers, all of this kind of profile was present, more likely to be present. So this is where it's based. And it's a mirror image, similar image, sorry, and because it works in a sense for both communities.
It's a mistake on your slide, that's why the question. Should that be Greek Cypriots? The second slide? Yeah.
The previous is for Greek Cypriots. The next one is for Turkish Cypriots.
Then this first sentence should say the more power Greek Cypriots, GC, had in the village, the more likely it was. Yeah, so that's the case.
The same sentence in both cases. The first one.
The more power Turkish Cypriots had in the village, the more likely it was that Greek Cypriots, when they answered, would present the following picture.
Yes, and the second slide?
And the second, the more power again Turkish Cypriots had in the village, the more likely it was that Turkish Cypriots themselves would present the following picture.
Okay.
Okay? So these are the answers of Turkish Cypriots, and the previous is the answers of Greek Cypriots.
Okay, so this was the only case where the Turkish Cypriots had more power in the village.
Exactly.
And there wasn't any study about when, in the cases where Greek Cypriots had more power.
Well, this is like a continuum. The more Turkish Cypriots you have, the less Greek Cypriots you have. Because it's a percentage.
Thank you.
Peter? The microphone at the back, gentleman at the back.
This is a question coming from a historian, Paris, and thank you very much for a fascinating paper. But my question as a historian is whether the research goes on to show what kinds of explanations for the Cyprus issue were given or were implied when there was less blame imputed to foreign influences.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Usually, when there is more less attribution of blame to foreigners, the blame comes to own community. That's how it usually works, what we usually find. So it's like, where is the blame for the Cyprus issue? Who is to blame? Is it us? Or is it all the others but us? So usually that's how it plays.
Also in this set of data, also. Another question? Last question, perhaps? Yes.
Do you think to have this kind of activity in these schools, like in English school?
What activity are you referring to?
The blame of the Cyprus confusion. How do they believe in that school nowadays? Have you got such a activity there? Have you asked such questions?
Okay.
Turkish Cypriots
Yes.
and the Greek Cypriot there.
Actually, we have not done research in the English course. But there is a published research by Michalinos Zerpilas. You can find his work. It was recently published, who did ethnographic work in the English course. So there's a lot of information about the relationships there between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Paris. And the next paper will be by Alex Gillespie. Alex is a senior lecturer at the University of Stirling in the UK and co-editor of Journal for the Theory of Social Behavior. His research focuses on joint activity, intersubjectivity, self and self-reflection. He's influenced by the work of James, Mead, Vygotsky, and Bakhtin. He has a monograph entitled Becoming Other, From Social Interaction to Self-Reflection, published by Information Age Publishing. He's also co-editor with Ivana Markova of a forthcoming volume entitled Trust and Conflict, Representation, Culture and Dialogue, to be published by Routledge. So, Alex.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here. I've known Karis for 10 years or more and heard so much about the Cyprus issue. My father grew up here in Cyprus and heard all about the Leader Palace Hotel and so on. This is the first time I've come, and it's really exciting to be part of a small part of what is such a large initiative by Karis and Carol. So thank you. The title of my talk, Distrust and Non-Transformative Social Interaction. So I realise now, after listening to everyone else's talk, that I seem to be a bit more negative. Other people have spoken about cooperation and mutual respect, and I am talking about distrust and when social interaction doesn't work, when it doesn't lead to change. I feel a bit self-conscious about it now, but I promise you a somewhat happy ending, because I do think understanding this can help lead to cooperation and transformative social interaction. It's just a different way of looking at it. So what I'm going to do, the structure of the talk, is the first half, I'm going to tell you about how I ended up looking at this question of distrust and non-transformative social interaction through some experiments we did on perspective taking and why perspective taking doesn't work. And then I'm going to introduce to you a concept which I took from Serge Moscovici of semantic barriers. And this is really the idea I want to communicate to you today. And that is simply this, that a semantic barrier is a way of thinking about the person who you're interacting with in such a way that regardless of what they say, you're not really going to listen. They are dismissed from the outset. And distrust is a classic case of that. If you distrust the person you're talking to, regardless of what they say, you brush it aside. So I'm interested, So I'm interested in how we can dismiss the perspective of other people. That's what I want to look at. So, yes, transformation through social interaction. This comes up in lots of different domains of research. Intergroup contact, which Karis has already mentioned, and Gordon Allport. This work has been well established through a lot of studies. Contact in an intergroup conflict situation where there's equal status, sharing a common goal, interdependence in terms of resources and so on, and they're supported by laws and customs. This tends to work. In the public sphere, we have Habermas's theory of how society should develop rules and engage in democracy and voting and so on through the public sphere, where we all engage in discussion, deliberative discussion, where we're inclusive, we don't exclude anyone from our discussions, we don't privilege status, we engage as rational debaters, and we discuss issues of common concern. So you can see there, and very similar to what Karis has just presented from Piaget and so on. And then also in the child development directly, I think in Vygotsky, joint attention and scaffolding. Scaffolding is where an expert sort of guides a novice through a task.